Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy, retired Justice of the New York State Supreme Court. In 1995, I moved my law practice from Manhattan. I used to be right alongside Madison Square Garden on 34th Street between 7th and 8th Avenue. And I moved it to my neighborhood in Jackson Heights. My boxing practice was diminishing because Madison Square Garden used to be the capital of world championship boxing until Las Vegas and Atlantic City came into prominence with the casinos. They had lower taxes in New Jersey and in Nevada, and they would cater to the big fights and make it very inviting to stage fights there, because the take on nights of big fights was huge, because high rollers, apparently the high rollers were attracted, the same crowd that were attracted to big championship fights, and the casinos caught on and they made a living of it. So it was no longer necessary. I had also been the lawyer for Gleason's Gym, which was nearby right on 31st Street and 8th Avenue. And they didn't even have to be near the Garden anymore, and they moved to Brooklyn. In the neighborhood Dumbo, underneath the Manhattan Bridge overpass. So my practice was also changing. After 21 or so years in litigation of civil, criminal, and administrative law, it's pretty stressful. And I was evolving into a neighborhood lawyer. I moved to my neighborhood in Jackson Heights, where I had been very, very active in community affairs. I served 2 terms as president of the Jackson Heights Beautification Group. And the Jackson Heights Beautification Group, we got the neighborhood landmarked, cleaned the graffiti. We did a complete neighborhood turnaround. We started a Halloween parade for children, history books for children, and local history books for children and adults we published. We had garden tours, concerts in the park in the summertime, etc., and we did very, very well. I also started, I was the first president of an independent Democratic club called Association of Neighborhood Democrats, or AND. So one young lady is a local school teacher, Susan Ross, who was one of those teachers that are worth their weight in gold, because Susan was the kind of a teacher who could change lives. There's not many of them, but they're spectacular, and she was one of them. And she was a member of the Beautification Group. She was also a member of A&D, and she wanted to invite one of her friends, a fellow teacher, to come and speak at the political club at A&D, one of our monthly meetings, which she did. And the guy's name was Monty Jaffe, and he was a music teacher at a local elementary school. Well, at that time, in New York City, the chancellor of the Board of Education was Joseph Fernandez, who was a very, very good man in a very, very thankless job. And Chancellor Fernandez, he put out RFPs, or requests for proposals, for charter school ideas or new school ideas. And he was backed by a national organization called New Vision Schools, which favored charter schools. And they were searching for different proposals to back and to bring to fruition and try out. So Monty got together with 5 or so of his colleagues at PS 69 and put together a proposal called the Renaissance Charter School. It was one of 265 proposals that were submitted, and only 12 were selected as being feasible, practical, and worthwhile. Monty came to speak at the AND meeting, the A&D meeting, and he was a swell guy. He was just what you expect an elementary school music teacher. He was tweedy, a little frumpy, a little bit overweight, a round face, and unkempt black hair with big rimmed dark glasses made him look like an owl. But he was a swell guy, and he had a very, very easy personality. He explained, very laid back and very relaxed. And he explained that he had been brought up and still lived, and he was married in the Bronx with a couple of teenage kids. And he was born and raised in the Jewish faith, but he had converted to Buddhism, and you could see it in his personality. He was very Zen-like, but it was really, really nice. It wasn't put on. It was genuine. He was a true believer. He was a nice guy. And he explained the concept for the Renaissance Charter School and how it would work. He did this to lay out the ideas because he wanted political backing and community backing for the proposal. So he explained that it would be open to all children from District 30, which District 30 is northwestern Queens, starting along the shore from Astoria, Long Island City, Sunnyside, Woodside, Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, and Corona, right up to what was then Shea Stadium, now Citi Field. And his concept was to have grades kindergarten through 12, K through 12, with 50 kids on a grade divided into two classes. So there would be 25 kids in each class. And it would be team teaching so that the kids from K through 2 would be taught by a team of teachers, which would be their teachers for 3 years. Then they would move on to grades 3 through 5 inclusive with another team of teachers, which would happen for 3 years. And then from 6th to 8th grade with a third team of 3 teachers. And this would go until they entered high school, where it would be a conventional layout where the kids would go from class to class. All the 50 kids in each year, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, would go around and be taught by different teachers for different subjects. But the idea was a very sound idea because you would have these kids in the hands of the same teachers for 3 years who really got to know them and knew their strengths and weaknesses. And there wasn't so many of them that they couldn't be personally attended to and nurtured. And I myself, as a former 3-year veteran of the worst middle school in New York City in the South Bronx, was very enthusiastic because I knew how the schools were basically failing the kids. Another thing was that these kids, for the prospective student body, was not going to be skimmed. They were first come, first served from anywhere in the district. And that meant a wide variety of different communities, different races, ethnicities, etc., and economic standing. And if there was too many applicants, they would be just drawn by lottery, in a lottery. And there would be no skimming. They weren't going to take the smartest kids that were applying. They were taking whoever came on a first come, first served basis, which was a very, very nice idea. Well, Monty won over the audience at the club, and we had a motion to pledge our support politically and in the community affairs fully. And I personally volunteered to be the pro bono lawyer, no fee for the effort. And that's when the roller coaster ride started. Now, we had it was selected again by New Vision Schools and Chancellor Fernandez. So we had the full backing. We had the blessing of the establishment and backing some money and expertise, etc. But we didn't have a place to put the school. There was no site for the school yet. And so for the first 3 years, we were searching for a site, and they rented an empty Catholic school in Long Island City. And the Renaissance School got started with the pioneer families in the old St. Patrick's Catholic School in Long Island City in Dutch Kills. And we're looking, and finally, we focused on a local department store right there in Jackson Heights at the corner of 82nd Street, the whole block between 81st and 82nd Street on 37th Avenue. It's a big commercial street. It was an old department store. When Jackson Heights was built, this was a very, very upper middle class, exclusive ladies department store called Fields. And the place had seen better days. The building was in good shape, but the business had failed because the population had failed over the years. It not failed, but it had changed over the years. The demographic had changed. It didn't have a lot of rich old middle class or upper middle class ladies to support this place. It was currently owned by an Italian immigrant and his wife, and he bought it on the courthouse steps at a mortgage foreclosure sale. So he got a bargain price. But his wife and his daughter ran the dress business on a kind of skeleton crew basis. They had a couple of part-time helpers, and the place was basically a shadow of what it once was. But it was inherently valuable because the building was a very, very good building, very, very well built, nicely built, well maintained, and the location was terrific because it was one block from the 82nd Street stop on the IRT 7 train, the subway. So it was very, very accessible for anybody. As a commercial venture, it would be great. It would be ideal for the school because kids from all over District 30 could come by easily accessible public transportation. So that was perfect. Well, not so perfect, it turns out. Opposition popped up. First opposition came from a local community leader, so-called, who said, this school is going to be built over my dead body. Well, what's the problem here? That's a little drastic. She said, we don't need another school. Well, it turns out that she was on the board of directors of a local private school that was doing very, very well and didn't want the competition. She was also chairman of the Business Improvement District, which was a group of commercial ventures, storefronts and small businesses, which banded together to get the streets swept and promote, have holiday lighting and things of that nature to promote the stores. Then we had another opposition position taken by our local city councilman. His first objection was, well, this is too expensive. The rental figure for this place was $7 a foot. That was the common rental, rate in the commercial area of Jackson Heights. And he said, the schools are renting other places for $1 and $2 a foot. And I pointed out, yes, but those places were in marginal, they were broken down warehouses in out of the way neighborhoods, rat infested, this, that, and the other thing, needed big construction, etc., etc. This place was in mint condition and right near public transportation. And $7 a foot was not unreasonable under those circumstances because the place was really, really good as compared to some of the other places. When he knew that argument wasn't going to win, he switched arguments and said, well, this landlord is an undesirable. People think he's in the mafia. I said, well, he's Italian. That doesn't make him a mafia member. By the way, the guy came from Tuscany. But I said, okay, he's a mob member? Yeah, he's a mob member. I said, well, this guy, every morning at 7 o'clock, he takes an empty van, his empty van, and he drives to the garment district and he buys cheap dresses to stock the inventory of his wife and daughter's department store. I said, do you know any mob leaders that get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to go buy dresses in the garment center? I don't. He said, well, he's also got tax trouble. I says, ooh, a landlord with tax trouble. Since when does New York City ever disqualify any landlord with tax trouble? And what big landlord in New York do you know that doesn't have tax trouble? I said, it's ridiculous. These things are actually, just spurious arguments. The fact was, he was being disingenuous. What he was trying to do was take the critic's role because he's covering up the fact that he had taken no active role in getting a new school or relieving any school crowding in our district. So now he had a chance to show off or cover for his own lack of incentive, and on behalf of the committee. Well, we overcame all of that. And the next thing we had to do was to try to make the deal for this 600 plus seats that we needed. And I told the councilman, I said, I don't care what this guy is, if he's a criminal or a tax cheat or the devil himself. If he can give us 600 seats for our kids in our district, that's fine with me. I would deal with him anytime. No problem. Well, the next phase was negotiating the contract. We blew away the opposition. And the terms to negotiate were a little bit difficult or complicated. It wasn't easy. It wasn't the end of the world, but it wasn't easy because we had, on the one hand, Board of Education bureaucrats. Those people are nice people, but they're civil service. They're not business people. And they get paid their salaries like clockwork, regardless of the outcome of any deal. So they don't have a real stake in making the deal. So they're kind of casual about it. On the other side, I have the Italian immigrant landlord who's suspicious of everybody. He's even self-insured because he won't deal with insurance companies because they're crooks. And he's totally on his guard and very, very close. Plays his cards very close to the vest. And he's, again, totally suspicious of everybody. And he was not particularly sophisticated. He was kind of a rudimentary. He knew what he was doing, but he wasn't, well-versed in fancy leases like the city was dishing out. Next, we had to get mayoral support, which was another hurdle. Well, the mayor was Rudy Giuliani at that time, and Giuliani was Republican. I'm the president of a Democratic club, and I hadn't endorsed him. I refused to endorse him. I was asked to endorse him and be the first Democratic club to endorse Giuliani, and I said, no, Democrats, we don't do that. My forebears would be rolling over in their graves if we thought we endorsed a Republican. So how do we get to Giuliani? Well, he had a scheduled town hall meeting in the adjoining neighborhood right near Astoria Heights. And The problem with that is that his town hall meetings were rigged, and he would only take questions pre-printed or written out by people in the audience. They were handed into his staff, who would screen the questions and only get softball questions that the mayor would want to answer, and they would only take them from people that they knew, supporters or acolytes, Republican acolytes that they knew. So we solved that problem. One of our parents, one of our members, was a funeral director who happened to, she a female who carried a gun. She had a licensed gun. She was arch conservative, and but she had been a good sized donor for Giuliani, and they knew that. So we gave her the question and said, "Okay, you submit this question. Do you support, Mr. Mayor? Will you support the Renaissance Charter School proposal?" And we said, "Hold on to that." We then packed two school buses, filled with parents of the children at Renaissance who had been in the temporary school all this time. And we told everybody, when the time comes that you'll know when, you stand up and make a big noise and wait for the right moment. You'll see. So sure enough, the meeting takes place. They get to that question, and our representative said, "Do you support this?" And I stand up, and the whole crowd stands up, and we start cheering. And Giuliani, being no jerk, said, "Of course I support this." He got a standing ovation. Well, now we had mayoral support. That's good. But it's not over. We have to finalize the lease. So the lease comes down. Basically, it was a 20-year lease, $1 million a year in rent at $7 a square foot, because I had gotten comparables, letters from various merchants and landlords, affirming that the rate was $7 a foot. Okay, that was good. Plus, above the $20 million rental lease money was a $6 million construction contract to convert the building from a department store into a school, a viable school. And of that $6 million contract, our landlord was going to be his own contractor, and he was allowed to take 25% or $1.5 million as his fee for the contract, as his profit margin. So he stands to make $21.5 million. Well, that's great, except that the city presents the lease, and they have in their lease a right to cancel on demand without notice. And the renter, or the lessor, the landlord, he has no right to cancel. Well, when my Italian friend, the landlord, saw this, he says, "I'm never going to sign a contract, and that's not fair. How could they cancel any time and I can't?" I said, "Well, they're not going to cancel a school. They never cancel a school. People will go crazy. There'll be a revolution if they try to cancel a school." "Oh, no, they have the right and I don't." And he was right. So I approached the new chancellor of schools, who was then Carol Gresser, and I said, "What about a cancellation clause? You can't do this. My guy doesn't want to sign this particular landlord." And I'm not representing him. He had his own lawyers, but I was representing the parents. We want to get the school done and get the deal done. And she said, "No way. That's indispensable. That's a clause in every lease that we have for every school that the department or the Board of Education gives out. And that's indispensable. It's not going to be canceled. We can't eliminate that or nullify that clause." Well, I spoke to my friends at New Vision School and told them, and they said, wait a minute. And they sent me a lease which had, for another charter school, a 5-year no cancellation clause on the part of the Board of Education. It turns out that school was in Manhattan, is just forming, and the principal was the life partner of Diane Ravitch, who had been recently divorced from Richard Ravitch. Diane Ravitch, in her own right, was one of the foremost national scholars on systems of education in the United States and all around the world. And her husband, Richard Ravitch, was one of the 3-4 guys who saved the city during the financial crisis of the 1970s, when the city almost went bankrupt. So Diane, her life partner, was the principal of this other school in Manhattan that got 5-year no cancellation. I got the lease from New Visions, and we faxed it to Carol Gresser, who either had lied, or didn't know. Either one was unforgivable as far as I'm concerned. But in any event, she reversed herself when she saw that lease. And she says, "Okay, we'll give you 5 years, no cancellation, in light of the fact that we've already done it once. So now I go to the landlord, and I said, well, I have good news. We have 5 years, no cancellation. Now, this guy, he says, no good. 20 years, no cancellation. I can't do 5 years, no cancel. I said, come on. I said, it's being unreasonable. They're not going to do this. This is the only one in the world. No. I was at my wit's end. This guy was going for the kill. He was just a hard-nosed businessman. He didn't want to sign without squeezing out whatever he could. So I was at a loss. And I'm thinking about what my mother used to say. Well, you ate the whole cow. Now you have to swallow the tail, and you can't get this done. So what the hell am I going to do? I didn't know what to do. This called for drastic measures. So his store was right across from my office, his department store, and I would see him every day. A couple of days go by, and I see him coming out of the coffee shop with a container of coffee in his hand. I said, excuse me, can I talk to you? Can I ask you a question? And he goes, you could ask me anything you want to ask me anytime. I always listen to you. Whatever you want to ask me. What's the question? I said, well, here's the question. How many effing dresses do you have to sell to make $21.5 million? Well, he was stunned. His jaw dropped. His eyes started flaring. I left him standing there holding that cup of coffee and walked away. Over the next couple of days, as I would see him on the street or across the street, he would start gesticulating, pointing at me, waving his arms in the air frantically, and mumbling some, he was apoplectic. I think he was speaking in tongues. I don't know what the hell he was talking about, Italian, English. I don't know what he was saying, but he was apoplectic. Okay. 1 week later, he signed the lease, and we got it. Now it's done. Now it's January. He has that place. He's the contractor. He opens it up in September, fully transformed from a department store, which, by the way, was a lot of empty, big open space, which was good, into a fully fledged school. And to his credit, this so-called mafia tax cheat, whatever he was supposed to be, at his own cost, he lowered the floor in the basement 1 foot, raised the basement ceiling 1 foot to create an 8-foot elevation, which permitted the architects to use that for children's space as a cafeteria and classrooms, because it had to be a minimum of 8 feet. It was a 6-foot elevation. And he did that. He even did that at his own cost. The place was spectacular, and it's a raging success. And it's a UFT charter school. They have a contract with the union, one of the few charter schools that has a union contract. And this school, every year, with kids that come from all over the district, graduates 50 kids from high school, 45, 46, 95% of these kids go on to college, most of them with scholarships. It should be the poster child for charter schools in New York City, except for the fact that the UFT is mortally afraid of charter schools. They view them as an existential threat to their carrying on their union business. But I spoke at the first graduation. I was an honored guest at the first graduation, high school graduation, and at the 10th graduation. And both times I saw the same phenomenon. I saw 50 high school kids, teenagers, crying at the thought of having to leave the school that had nurtured them and taught them so well. They were crying. They didn't want to leave. The whole place, Renaissance School, was founded in 2000. It is a raging, spectacular success, and I'm very proud of it, but nothing good comes easy. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.